Welcome to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and their journey. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show, and every week I talk to interesting CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. We've had Netflix, we've had Kinko's, we've had Grubhub, we've had Lending Tree, all kinds of interesting companies. Check out our archives, and you can hear some of those episodes. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise25, my company where we specialize in crafting custom podcasts and content marketing strategies for B2B businesses with a high client lifetime value. You can go to our website at rise25.com and learn all about what we do in our brand new platform, Podcast Copilot, which we're really excited about. Today, we are talking about scaling up a healthcare business through a pandemic. How do you do that? We're going to be talking all about that. And also, we'll be talking about how to find a strategic acquirer for your business. My guest here today, his name is Kenny Schiff, spent 3 years finding the perfect strategic acquisition company to acquire his company and ended up getting acquired. So we'll talk about how he did it in a second. All right. So Kenny, so excited to have you here today. Your title is the Director of Analytics for Lone Star Communications, which is a Texas-based healthcare solutions company that provides technology and services for hospitals. You spent 25 years or so in the healthcare space, and your company, CareSight, was founded in 2016. It's an analytics as a service platform. We'll talk all about what that is, and of course, your story about finding the right acquisition partner and running that company during COVID and Obamacare and all these different challenges that you've had over the years. And I want to put a plug in for your new podcast, which may be live by the time we publish this episode. CarePoints Podcast is the name of it. And you are based in Naples, Florida. But first, I love to tell people to start people off, Kenny, by getting to know you a little bit better and hearing a little bit about what little Kenny was like back when you were a kid. And you came from a family of entrepreneurs. Your father was an entrepreneur. You had a grandfather who was an entrepreneur. Let's start with Grandpa. What did Grandpa do that was entrepreneurial? I'd love to hear that.
So my grandfather became a haberdasher in Europe before World War II. And he was a refugee. And my mother and my grandmother eventually traveled to the United States after the war started. And he had to figure out whatever he needed to do in order to have a livelihood for his family. So he was a diamond cutter. He did wholesale trade for all kinds of things. And he eventually became a diamond dealer in the New York City area. And he also, along the way, had all kinds of side hustles, but that's what entrepreneurs do. So he was somebody who understood how to create with what was in front of him. And he was a very resourceful guy.
Were you conscious of learning any lessons around that as a kid, or is it now, looking back, having been an entrepreneur, that you realize that you picked up some of that?
I would say what I picked up more than anything else is that this was not a family of corporate people. So one's livelihood was dependent on one's own efforts and one's own ability to take things and make something out of nothing. So whether it be my grandfather coming to this country with basically no money in his pocket and trying to figure out a way to earn a living and have a good life for his family, and eventually my father working as a pharmacist to create a good life for his family. Nobody did anything for them. And if anything I retained, it was that sort of self-determination and that ability to deal with what was in front of them and do something with it.
And I believe you said your father was also an entrepreneur. Did he run or acquire or start his own pharmacy?
Yeah, he owned Your Chemist on the east side of New York City. And as a young kid, I experienced that. So I understood what that was like for somebody to have to go in on a Saturday morning or respond to a situation. And even though it took me a long time to eventually sort of own up to my own entrepreneurness, I always understood and felt that, and it was a kind of part of a core understanding of what people do.
And do you recall any? Sometimes this happens where the next generation of entrepreneurs run the opposite direction, which you did for many years. You worked in the corporate world, didn't start a company for a while. Did the experience of seeing your father having to go in on Saturday mornings, do you recall did it lead you to not want to own your own company for a period of time?
I don't think it necessarily had any impact on it. For me, I didn't understand my own power and my own ability to do something from a livelihood standpoint. I guess it was nascent. It was waiting there in the background. But no, I definitely didn't run in the other direction. I don't know that I ran in any particular direction, but I think a lot of that is a reflection of the time and place. And I think I came of age in the 1970s in New York City, and I wasn't around people that were creators certainly from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And then it took some time for me to kind of climb into that.
And one of the foundational experiences was you ended up working for a company called TPC Associates, which you described as kind of a smaller, I don't know if you used this word scrappy, but family-owned business, and where you could start to see the potential of owning your own business. Take us back to that period of time. This is early 2000s that you're working for this company?
Yeah. So I showed up on the owner's doorstep in 2002, and his name is Tom Kafora, takes a look at me and says, "I could use a guy like you." What that meant, I didn't know. But
what do you mean by you showed up on his doorstep? I'm picturing you like it's raining and you literally show up on someone's doorstep, but I don't know if that was
so I had a little bit of a side trip into a very, very heavy duty corporate job for Hewitt Associates, a multinational HR consulting company. And 2002, after 9/11, the economy was in a pretty bad space, and the consulting business really took a significant dive, and 75 of us at Hewitt at the time got laid off, and I needed a job. And I've often asked, what's your special power? I'm a good networker. I'm a relationship person. And I asked my former boss from a prior company I worked for, who should I talk to? And there were two different companies. One was 25 miles one way. The other one was 25 miles the other way. And I reached out to Tom, and he said, "Sure, come on by." And so, yes, metaphorically showed up on his doorstep. It wasn't in the rain, but there was immediately a synergy. And the kind of funny thing is, it turns out that we both share the same birthday. I'm 2 years older than he is, but there was something about us complementing each other. And the big thing about that experience for me, more than anything else, is that, number one, he kind of took me into his confidence in a way that I don't know that he did for other people in his business. It was a good time in that healthcare technology was really beginning to change, and he understood that I could help him develop some of his own ideas around it and help him commercialize those things and bring them to market. And the amazing thing about entrepreneurial businesses is there are incredibly creative playgrounds for people who are able to live in that place. There's certainly chaos to it. And I was very, very comfortable with looking at all the things that were in front of me and saying, here's what we need to do with it. And because it was a family business, and because it was a smaller business at the time, we were able to do things. I was able to go with him with a somewhat half-baked idea and kind of work on it together and make something out of it. And that's really the special thing that I learned. And in that time, I began to build my own confidence and say, wow, people can be creative in business. So I'm a musician. I like to make things. I'm somebody who likes to cook, and I'm interested in. I'm kind of a chopped guy. What's in the basket?
Yeah.
And to make something out of it, and to connect that to a business, that was like the big aha for me.
Now there's plenty of people though. it sounded like you were enjoying a lot of the elements of this role, but was there something missing that led you to think, I want to go out and do this for myself now?
So the way I like to talk about it is I did not identify as being the guy in charge until that moment in time. So I needed to feel the confidence of some of these things on my own. And it's not that I was nervous or risk averse. I just didn't know. The opportunity hadn't existed prior to that moment in time to actually say, you know what, I can do this. And it's not that we have, Tom and I have a fantastic relationship still to this day. He was an investor in CareSight. But I knew at that moment in time that it was time for me to spread my wings. And look, he understood and supported me in so doing, so that I could do my own thing, because it was time for me to do that.
And was that a hard conversation?
Let's just say that it was it had it had a lot of dimensions to it, and it was not something that happened right away. It took some time. I think we eventually arrived at a good thing for both of us.
Yeah.
But look, any time an individual decides to break out of X, Y, or Z, it can be awkward.
Yeah. Now, as you make this decision to go out on your own, have your own company, it's one, we all know that it's one thing to say, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to create solutions, I'm excited. It's another to get paying clients. What was the vision? What was the gap in the marketplace, or what was the vision? How are you going to make this into a business, at least in the early days? I imagine it probably changed over time.
Well, I would say the common thread from then till now was that technology is sold to people as though it's magic. You buy X, Y, or Z, and this is true whether if it's industrial, business to business, or consumer marketing, that we want to as marketers, snare people and say they'll just take a leap and buy it. But then there is the reality of after you buy it. And I understood that there was a missing place between the technology and the actual application of the technology, and that gap needed to be filled not by technology, but by people. And it wasn't tech support. It was actually the whole arc of, how do I think about deploying this technology? What happens on day 1? What happens on day 30? What happens on day 360? That there was a life cycle to living with technology. And I think that's, now that we're 40 years into the post, PC era, I think it's really been damaging that technology manufacturers, solutions providers haven't really thought about how people will live with their technology after the fact.
It's such an interesting conversation because, and I was just talking with someone at a EO event recently about this, because there's a lot of companies these days, including our own, where the foundation might be a professional service, but you're leveraging a lot of technology. And then on the other side of that gap is companies that are a technology that have a service component to them. And we were talking about that difference between those two and the transition, because it can make a big difference in terms of how you describe the company and the valuation of the company. What are your thoughts on that in terms of like your company, and like, what was it fundamentally a software? Was it fundamentally a service, or is it there are elements of both? Like, how do you describe what
it's
it is?
It's a dessert topping and a floor wax. To borrow the Saturday Night Live skit, I would say that it was always really a service with tools. One of Dan Oyster, who works with me, is a content marketer. He likes to call it technology plus a team. The difficulty that anybody has who tries to do the services first approach is that customers are reluctant to pay for those things. And push comes to shove, money becomes difficult, they'll try to do without. But what really, if a company buys technology that is a core aspect of how they operate and do business, they have inherent vulnerability if they rely on that technology and they don't have the ability to support it properly. And the technology that really triggered that for me was from a California company called Vocera, which is now owned by Stryker. And Vocera had a voice-activated kind of a Star Trek communicator thing that used Wi-Fi back in early 2000s. And Wi-Fi is inherently wonky. So if you don't have a good Wi-Fi network, the stuff will never work. But there were so many other elements of the technology that left the customer completely vulnerable. And what were people using this for? To summon a radiologist or an anesthesiologist or an emergency department doctor or nurse in a hospital setting. And if the stuff didn't work, or people didn't have workflows all worked out, then all that investment left the customer ultimately at risk. So I would say thematically, whether it was in 2003 or in 2023, that there's a lot of risk to deploying and depending on technology without the necessary wrapping. And I would say, for me, as a passion and as a mission, I feel in service to that. So does it make it challenging as an entrepreneur, given that people often don't want to pay for that, especially if IT is the one footing the bill? Yeah, it has made it really difficult along the way. But that's what makes entrepreneurs entrepreneurs. Sometimes we decide to do things even though they're really hard.
Speaking of challenges, you start this company in mid-2007. Actually, it looks like it's July 2007, around the time you're starting this company. Interestingly, I'm graduating from law school at this period of time, take the bar exam, and then also start my first entrepreneurial venture, which lasted for about a year before I ended up going back and getting a law job for a couple of years, and then eventually starting my second company, which was much better. But what was it like starting this company with this vision and going into what became a global economic recession?
Well, interestingly enough, I was able to kind of bring the customers that I had developed relationships along to my new business. So I had some built-in business, and I would say
that
the first 2-3 years of the predecessor business to CareSight went well. You have to understand the way funding cycles go. So by the time the recession started to hit, the money supporting what I was doing was already in the tank, if you will.
Okay.
And the customers had already bought these technologies. And if anything, it opened the door because they couldn't necessarily fund their own supporting staff. So the idea to use kind of fractional resources to support them was okay.
So that must have helped you to sleep at night because because you had these contracts in place. Yeah.
Right. And but I think, what the problem about the kind of business that I envisioned and started is it was leveraging other people's technologies. So many of those people became unfriendly to me because they did not want to admit that what I was doing was necessary. So Vocera, as an example, was about to go public at the time. So they couldn't basically tell their investors, by the way, we have a great idea, great technology, but after somebody puts it in, who knows what's going to happen? And so
you see that a lot with technology companies where they don't they don't even invest in that kind of product support stuff, which is really critical. So then a whole industry crops up of like certified providers who help people with the technology.
Yeah, and a mature company can do that. So they were evolving, and it was very difficult for them from a sales perspective, because on one hand, they needed to look good for the investors, that they had quarter over quarter growth and year over year growth. So they needed to kind of pump their numbers, and it was less important for the sustainability at that point in time. Mm-hmm. Very successful company anyway. It just if you are an independent, the doing consultative and augmentative product and services, the big players, whether it be a Cisco or a Microsoft, or in healthcare, an Epic or a Cerner or Baxter, Hillrom, they want customers to feel like they got it all. We got you covered. But the reality is, and it's not specific to healthcare, they don't. And people waste a lot of money on technology spend because they don't think about the realities of living with that technology.
Yeah, yeah. You're 48 years old when you start this company. What's the reaction of your family, your friends? I don't know if you have kids or a spouse at this period of time. And then I want to get into, for you personally, what it was like to step into this role.
I would say that people were incredibly supportive of me in every imaginable way. So I'm married. My wife, she did say to me when I came home and said, "Hey, I think I'm going to go out and do this on my own." And she said to me, "You sure you want to do this?"
By the way, here it is. This is like 16 years ago, maybe, or something, 17 years ago. Yeah. Notice how you recalled that statement. Notice how you crystal clear in your mind.
Yes, very, 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 very clear. But in the end, what we want to do for our partners, our spouses, our significant others, our family members, is we want them to be happy and we want them to be fulfilled. And I needed to do this. And she knew that, and she was ultimately cool with it. And look, being the partner to an entrepreneur is very burdensome. And we definitely went through some tough times. I have a daughter who's 25. So this is what she knows, from a very, very young age. But the other side of it is that I worked from home a lot of that time, so I was, both my wife and my daughter were very important parts of my life. So it wasn't like I was on the road and, never home and all that stuff. So that was there. And then just from a financial standpoint, this is a bootstrap company. My mom and my stepdad and all helped me out from a financial standpoint. My mother-in-law and father-in-law, same. And they did it for the right reasons. There was never an expectation that they had to get a return per se. Mm-hmm. It was about doing something that allowed me to fulfill my destiny. And that was a great thing. And then we talked a little bit about before. So around 2008, I was vacationing in St. Martin. And on the last day of the trip, we're on the beach, killing some time before we were going to take our flight. And my daughter picked up another kid, and the kid's parents were from the Boston area and were entrepreneurs. And the guy says to me, do you know about EO? You know what that is? You need to find out about EO. So I went back from that. And because at that point, what did I know about peer groups, support, anything like that? I just knew that I had jumped off the proverbial entrepreneurial cliff, but I didn't realize that there were other people going through the same thing. And I have always been a person who was ready, willing, able to get what I needed from other people. Mm-hmm. So I joined EO in 2008, and I was a card-carrying member for 8 years in the New York metropolitan area. And it served as a great reality buffer in that the ability to be vulnerable with other people who are entrepreneurs is something that I realized was an important part of being healthy while doing this.
Yeah. Now, in addition to starting this company on the beginning of a global economic recession, so there was that change that was affecting the economy, notwithstanding the fact that you said you had some longer term contracts, which was helpful. There was also some other major changes that were happening just in terms of technology. Obamacare happens during this period of time. Take us back to this period of time, and we're talking, 2008 to 2016 time period before CareSight really becomes its own, I guess, going concern. But how do you surf these changes as a relatively newer entrepreneur? Were there any big setbacks or anything like that you had to overcome?
So healthcare prior to that point was a very community-oriented enterprise. So in the New York metropolitan area, Connecticut, New York, et cetera, a lot of community hospitals, many of them independent or very, very small groups that might be working together. What it meant when I worked, especially when I worked at TPC early on, was that you could walk in the door, you could, get your way to a decision maker. What really shifted in the intervening years is that it's interesting. Obama has embraced Obamacare. It's not considered a derisive term anymore, but the idea of somehow improving how healthcare is funded and supported in the United States started to take hold. And at the same time, the health systems started to consolidate. So fewer and fewer hardcore community hospitals, more IDNs, integrated delivery networks, health systems. So what changed there is that all of a sudden a smaller player, regardless of the value one could provide to a health system, was less attractive, and that the decision-making at a healthcare level became very much more big business oriented. So harder to connect with the decision makers, harder to differentiate yourself. And then the combination of that, alongside some of what I talked about earlier, of these very large healthcare, especially in the technology space, healthcare IT companies, who really didn't want to leave room for smaller players. So the two of those made it be incredibly challenging. So what it forced for me over the next intervening years, which really led to the starting of CareSight, is I had to think about what I could do that would have the most visible value to the customer, and that would be consistently useful in a broad fashion in a healthcare business. So the idea of CareSight was about extracting and using data from systems that were mostly behind the scenes, kind of buried, and where the people who needed the outputs of that data just didn't have access to that, for whether it was old technology or the various solution providers obfuscating that somehow or making it difficult for them. So combining the idea, so the business need for me was to find something that was very tangible and visible, and that had value, whether it be safety or operational or even patient experience value, and combining it with this notion that the customer, the health system, couldn't do those things themselves. And that these big technology companies, they were in business to sell whatever their thing was and leave. So that was the germ of what CareSight was founded upon.
So many questions around that. That sounds like a big bet. Sounds like a big investment. And it also sounded like a big bet because, if you go all in on this vision, this idea, and then, some other company, a Microsoft or something, comes along you can get obliterated pretty quickly. So take me through that. Like, how did you fund this new vision for CareSight? Did it scare you to go all in on this new vision, this new idea? How did you get the hospital systems to sign up for it? There's so many questions here.
The thing about being an entrepreneur is that when you're in the center of the volcano, if you will, you don't necessarily go through the same type of the strategic analysis that somebody who's got a larger, more mature concern might go through, or if somebody is, say, venture funded or otherwise funded. I was bootstrapping this company. And yeah, it was incredibly crazy from a risk perspective. And it took on a life of its own. And I'm sure you talked to many, many guests along the way. And a lot of people have told you the same thing, that these things do take on a life of its own. And the scary thing is that these businesses are hungry. They need to be fed. And I would say, in retrospect, my biggest weakness and the place that I probably made the biggest mistakes was had I had more money 10 years ago, because this was a big idea, I could have gotten much farther faster, but I was the wrong guy to raise money. I was a good evangelical founder. There's a lot of things I'm good at, but the raising the money thing was just not my jam. And there wasn't anybody else on my team or that I had partnered with that was the right. So I started this thing, and and it had a life of its own, and I had to keep it going.
So you made it work, bootstrapping it, like many do, probably taking some funds from the existing business and investing it in the future.
Yeah. Yes. And, taking money out of my 401k and IRA. Wow. and just doing and borrowing more money from friends and family. It's when this is the hardest thing. You have a great idea. You have great customers. You are connecting with all of that, but there is the business reality. And there arguably, there were many points where I probably should have stopped, but it was very, very difficult to do that.
Yeah.
So, which ultimately, so all that is happening. I'm trying to listen to as many people as I can to help me figure this out. It's a puzzle. Mm-hmm. And then the pandemic hits.
And so tell me what that was like for you. I mean, did you see your life flash before your eyes? Was it an opportunity for your business?
I would say we hung on for dear life, but I am grateful for the people that worked with me. Renee Savinsky, Eileen Sullivan, Sarah Hefty, Wojtek Grablovsky, Ed McNeil, Joni, the whole group. Everybody, we all loved this thing. It was our baby. And we all made tremendous sacrifices, and we also knew what we were doing was important. So we cut as many corners as we possibly could. We really skinnied ourselves up as much as we possibly could. And then I started to spend a tremendous amount of time trying to saying, hey, I have this thing. It's great. It's absolutely necessary. We have a working model of it. Somebody else has got complementary things that this matches up with. Who is that? And then, I mentioned earlier that I'm a strong relationship person. I'm a really good networker, and I started working it, and kept working it, because really in the end, there was no other choice. That I knew that there was a softer landing for this thing.
Yeah. And that led you to search for the right strategic partner, a journey that took about 3 years. How did you end up finding the right strategic partner for you?
So In the 90s, I worked for a company called Rauland-Borg. It was a healthcare, a company, a significant portion of their business was in healthcare. They were a limited distribution company, so they had very strong relationships with their resellers. And in my time there, 7.5 years, I got to know a lot of their resellers. One of them was Lone Star Communications, and I did know the owner, Ray Bailey, and I had remained peripherally in touch with him. I actually saw him the week before the pandemic, and I actually flew out to the Dallas area for a business conference we were both part of to say, hey, we should be doing some business together. And it was a great meeting, but then the pandemic happened. And then let's just say I went the whole arc of the possible people who might possible companies I might match up with. And through some pretty circuitous routes, a year and a half ago, we started talking, not necessarily me and Ray directly, but I started talking to some members of his team. Jeff Richard, who's my boss right now, Lone Star's CTO, and I started developing a relationship and talking about big things. And we found that we were very, very aligned on a lot of things. And we recognized in each other that we were puzzle pieces that could fit together in something much bigger for both of us. And we kept at it. And then by the summer of 2022, the trajectory was there. We were moving in that direction.
Yeah. Now, were you nervous going into this process that, letting the cat out of the bag or revealing your secrets to a much larger company, that they could just move into your space and compete with you, or, create it rather than buy it?
I knew that we had enough special sauce that it would be very difficult for a company, even a company as evolved and mature as Lone Star. They would have a really difficult time getting to where we were at. And so, no, I wasn't nervous about that. I don't know. At that point in time, you have to understand the relief of finding a partner, somebody who understood what we were trying to do. It just felt like it was the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And for all the people that have believed in you, for all the investors, what was that like for you finally consummating that transaction?
Well, it was a relief, right?
Yeah.
It was a way of me having a reasonable outcome.
Yeah.
And you asked before about, what's it like going through this? The biggest fear is complete implosion. And I had always, that was not what I wanted to do. That was not the picture I had in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this has been great. I'm going to wrap things up with, thank you for sharing your story here today. It was amazing. But, you mentioned you're great at networking. You enjoy networking. And you've had so many different people that have helped you in your journey. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about those who've kind of helped you in your journey. I love to give people the opportunity just to, kind of publicly thank people that have helped you, especially peers and especially contemporaries. You mentioned EO, you mentioned names of people, team, of course, we always mention that. We always thank our family. But in addition to that, were there other peers or contemporaries or mentors who were there for you during this journey?
So I worked for Maureen Payersky at Rauland during my tenure there in the 90s. And when I needed some guidance on what my next step would be professionally after I had left Hewitt, I reached out to her. And she's the one who really kind of set me up with Tom and TPC. So that was an important little glue there. And I would also say that during the pandemic, we had a virtual forum group not affiliated with EO, but run like an EO forum. So Robert Mendelson, Nicole Donnelly, Gazenfer Mansour, Brandon Lisi. Those are people who really just helped me at a very, very dark time. And just some friends. I have some musical cohorts. Tom Schmidt, who he and I got reconnected during the pandemic and have been playing the music together. And we had last been in the same place like 35 years ago. So those kinds of things. So I'm very appreciative of all that. And I'm sure I left out lots of people. And I'll just say that in my current situation, I call them my collaborators, Jeff Richard, Chris Andrus, Justin Bailey. Those are people who are there for me, and we work together. Dan Oyster, and I would say, forget about the journey itself. For me, I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with amazing people and do great things together. And however, at the lowest of the low, I always had that.
Yeah. This has been great. Kenny, where can people go to connect with you and learn more about you?
Well, you can look me up on LinkedIn, of course, Kenny Schiff, SCHIFF. LoneStarCom.com is the Lone Star website. And then if you want to email me, Kenny at CareSight, CareSight.com is the easiest. And so thanks for the opportunity and being in front of your audience.
Of course. Thank you, Kenny.
Thanks for listening to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast. This episode is powered by Rise 25. Please subscribe and check out future episodes.